Hello, everybody. I can see a little gathering there in the pastors' hall. Nice to see you all. John, Adam here. Adam, you're with a couple of people, I think. Are you not?
Yep. Lucy's here, and Johnny's going to arrive shortly, I think.
Well, I've had a couple of people say they are going to be watching the recording rather than watching live. I think otherwise we'd have been 14, I think. So we're probably going to be 11 or 12 households this evening, which is good. I've just been pulling together some pictures to try and show you a few images of what we were going through. So I'm just going to save that and make sure that's ready to go. Yeah, that should be okay. So just waiting for a few more to arrive. I'm very sorry to say that my darling wife Amanda has got a better offer. She's gone to see Tim Minchin tonight in Hammersmith. So very sadly, she won't be joining us, but so it's just me tonight.
Well, that'll save you the embarrassment of always forgetting to mention her.
Thank you, David. Yes.
Oh, you're recording this, are you?
Yes, I thought that might be a good plan because there's a few people who can't make it who'd like to watch the recording, if that is all right.
Hi, Justin. Long time since we've seen each other. It's Nick here, Nick Tubbs.
Yeah, Nick, hi, how are you? Long time no see.
Yeah, exactly. Very good to see you. I was just talking to James about his visit to your place the other day, which you much enjoyed.
Yes, indeed. No, it was lovely to see him. Nick and I were at school together a very long time ago and have a mutual friend. So apologies for reminiscing, but yeah, it's really nice seeing James in France. Yeah. It's quite nice having visitors over Vintage. So I'm often down there on my own for, well, Amanda will come out for a weekend at least, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm usually there for about 5 weeks. So it's quite fun having various people come and visit, which they often do. So any of you who haven't yet been down, then I do encourage you to come and pay a visit during harvest time, because it's a really great time of year. Lots of those little French villages are quite sleepy most of the year, but when harvest is on, they really come alive, and lots of activity, lots of buzz, lots of people in the cafe. It's quite a fun time to come.
Justin, just one question. Are we meant to have poured?
Good point. I think it's probably a good idea with all these being relatively young wines. If you have your 6 glasses in front of you, which would be great if you have them, I do suggest you pour them all, because over an hour they're not going to deteriorate. So that's probably not a bad plan. So start on the left with the 2013. And then 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 in order, which shouldn't be beyond the realms of most people's capabilities. So yeah, let's do that. I'm actually just going to go and grab a fresh set, because when I make these up, I decant them obviously out of bottles directly into the baby bottles, and we just had one set where I had about 3/4 of a bottle. It varies, but when you get to the end of a bottle, basically there's 750 mils in a bottle. Each one of these baby bottles is theoretically 100 mils, but if you fill it to 100 mils, it's not quite full. So I tend to fill it right into the neck so that there's no air. And that means it's used about 72 mils, which means I can't get the last, anyway, the last one doesn't fill a bottle. So with 3 or 4 sets of samples, I can nearly fill a bottle. I'm tasting from these not quite full bottles, and they're a little bit oxidized. So I'm going to go and get a fresh set. I made a few spares. So, because I want to be able to taste them as you're tasting them. So hang on a moment. Okay, let's get these set out in order. I made a few more sets because I thought that it might be quite interesting for people who can watch the video to buy them as a Christmas present for someone, as a set of samples, and then point them at the video to learn more about them. So just going to set these up in order. Great. Okay, Patrick is joining us. Good to see. Hi, Dorothy. Hi, Vidya. Nice to see you too. Welcome. So I think I said 10 or 11 households, so we're probably expecting a couple more, but there were, as I said earlier on, a handful of people got in touch to say they were going to watch the recording, so we won't all be here. I'm just going to go and ditch the wines I poured already. So it'd be interesting to hear from you how you think they're tasting. I reckon it's fine to do the decanting and pouring out a week or two before, and they survive pretty well. I'm just going to taste these fresh ones. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, right. Well, look, welcome everyone. I think we should make a start. It's great to see you. I'd be interested to know, I know a few of you were here for the first 6 vintages tasting, but could you just stick your hand up if you were here for that? I certainly was. Dorothy was. Patrick was. Can't see any other hands actually. So Video, I know you weren't. John, I don't think you were. So yeah, the rest of you, this is a new experience. So we did taste, gosh, was it April, sometime around then? The first 6 vintages that we made. We started in 2007. So just a very quick recap. We bought a vineyard in 2004. Didn't really have a plan, didn't really know what to do. But we thought we'd give away the grapes for 3 or 4 years, well, 2 or 3 years, to my friend Richard, and then work out over the intervening years how to turn it into a little project. And then 2 years later, we bought 2 more blocks. And then at the end of the following year, we made our first wine, which was 2007 vintage. So we had the chance to taste the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 vintages. What we have now are the following 6 vintages, which are the 13, skipping the 14, which reasons we'll come on to later, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So 19 is the last vintage we bottled. Obviously, we have 20 in barrel and 21 just finished fermentation and about to be pressed. So 2 more vintages in the pipeline, but obviously not yet released. So this is our chance just to line up the last 6 vintages and have a taste of them. I've got a few slides and pictures to show you, so I'm just going to go and see if I can share my screen. Apologies, I have to keep putting my glasses on and off. I'm sure some of you are facing the same stage in life where reading glasses are now necessary. But let's have a look. Yeah, hopefully you can see that when I turn it on. I've just got a new computer and it says I have to give Zoom permission to share my screen, so bear with me. Just bear with me a tiny bit. In order to do this, it's possible this will take the Zoom down, but fingers crossed.
Is it your Zoom account?
Yes, it is my Zoom account.
Oh, you should be able to share without.
Yeah, no, that's not the issue. It's just I got a new computer, so it probably won't let me until I go into the settings. So hang on a moment. Cancel. Yeah, got to make changes. It's always a good idea to think of these things in advance. Fingers crossed that should now be possible. Okay, so share screen. There we go. Yeah. Right, you're looking at the screen now. I probably have to put it into presenter mode so you can see the slide. Okay, so this is just a few pictures I literally pulled together in the last hour or two. So there's nothing very sophisticated about it. I just wanted to share this one because this is a picture I took this vintage actually. It was a couple of days before I left, and I was at a loose end for half an hour before I met my friend Richard for a drink. And I just thought, oh, I'll just pop up to the vineyard. It's quite a nice evening and see if I can take some pictures. And I took 2 or 3 of the most stunning photographs of our La Roque vineyard, which is just turning, and the autumn colors. This is a Carignan vineyard. Almost all these vines in front of you are Carignan. There's a few whites mixed in. You can see the sheer number of colors that the same grape variety will produce, from green all the way to deep red, depending on the sort of stage of dryness and the sort of autumn change. But it's a really stunning vineyard. I've got lots of wonderful shots from that. But what I thought would be good to start with is just talk about, why does one vintage vary from another? And obviously, weather conditions change every year. And I could have gone a bit deeper into each year's weather conditions. We certainly have done that in the past. When we looked at one vintage, we sort of delved quite hard into the conditions. But what I thought would be useful, I just track the harvest date. So there's 3 vineyards here: La Roque, which is the one you saw, the Carignan vineyard; Bac de Genève, which is the Grenache vineyard; and the Cume d'Oie, which is the kind of mixed vineyard, which makes Les Genoux. And you can see from here that we're harvesting mid-October as probably about the latest we go. And then the earliest we pick is probably in the 20s of September. So 2017 was an early vintage when we started picking on the 22nd of September. Are you seeing my mouse, incidentally?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So 22nd of September, the 28th and the 29th. So we were all done by the end of September, which is quite unusual for us. Whereas 14, you can see, was a really late year. All 3 blocks, we waited till the middle of October. Same true of 13, in fact. And actually, those are both really tricky years for us. So it's interesting to debate. People think about, late harvesting meaning riper grapes, but we were waiting that late because our grapes weren't ripe yet, and we were just waiting till they got riper, and then we ended up with accelerating to poor weather conditions. But this generally, I think it's true that the earlier the harvest, the likelihood is that the quality is better and the volume is better. And that certainly holds true for 2017, which we'll taste in a bit. 2015, again, quite an early harvest, also a really good one. 18 was pretty good, 19 was pretty good, 20 was a bit less good, and 21, I don't know if you can see that, it was on there, sorry. I couldn't see my, oops, go backwards again. Can't see the dates 21, yes, they are on there. Yeah, we started picking in October in 21, but I think we ended up with some pretty good quality. So that's a little bit on harvest dates. Let's have a look at the first wine. So 2013, this is probably a good chance to have a, well, first of all, have you all got them poured? And the last people to arrive may not have heard the message that it's a good idea, if you can, to pour them all out in front of you so you can compare the colours. I think what we'll find is 13 is a relatively pale year, and there are some other ones further down the line that are a bit darker, and certainly towards the end are quite a bit brighter and pinker and more purpley because they're younger wines. But the 13 vintage was, I thought at the time, one of our less good vintages. It was more acidic, and it was because the grapes ripened really late. They didn't build sugar quickly enough, so we hung on to get the sugar levels up, and the acid levels were pretty high. And that was because of a really late, it was actually very light this year in that there was a really late frost cold period. So in 2013, I think March was really warm, but April was freezing, and for the whole month of April, so everything shut down. And everything stopped, and then the vine started again nearly a month later. So let's have a sniff and see what we think of the 2013. That acidity and that sort of delicacy and lightness may well have given it more poise and more elegance. And when I launched this, I think I thought this might not be so long-lived, and I put 2021 as the end of the drinking window. But I'd love to hear from you what you think. So why don't we all have a sniff and then chip in your thoughts, please, if you'd like to share them. I mean, I'm detecting quite high acidity, quite strong tannin still, but lovely soft rounded fruit. It's very much kind of coming into itself. It doesn't seem in any way to be the fruits to be drying or fading, but there's a little twist of slight greenness on the finish, which perhaps means it isn't as smooth and rounded and satisfying as some of the riper vintages. Anyone else have any thought? David, you're normally you normally have something to say. What are your thoughts about this one?
I'll defer judgment. You know me, I'm no expert. But
well, I know, and also first wine syndrome. It's quite, when you first taste the first wine, it tastes like toothpaste or coffee or whatever you last ate.
Yeah, that's right.
Have a cider and then get your eye in.
Got some water as well.
Yeah.
Well, there's a bit more to go, isn't there? The fruit isn't disappearing so quickly that 21's the end, I wouldn't have thought.
Absolutely. So yeah, I all you can do when you launch a wine is say what you think at the time. When it's a very young wine, you're trying to look into its future and say what you think it might do. And I just had the feeling it might not be so long lived because it wasn't such a great vintage. But actually, the acidity and the sort of balance and the fruit quality, I think, means it will last. And it's got another 5 or 10 years ahead of it probably. It actually might outlive some of the other ones, which are a bit riper. But maybe we should taste a couple more before we can start really comparing between them. But I hope you got enough, each of you, in your glasses that you can leave enough in your glass to go back and have a look at that one a bit later on. Just a few a couple of photographs. I literally picked out one or two things to show you from each vintage that kind of trigger my memory of what happened that vintage. One of the things I did do is go up to the hill opposite the La Roque vineyard and do a time-lapse picture. And what I don't know is if I can actually show the video that's on YouTube. Let me have a look. I think I'll try and do that because it's, oh no, I can't because I can't link to it. Good news. Don't think there's any way to just escape from that. See if I can copy and paste into YouTube. You know, I'm a one-man band with Amanda's help from time to time and Fleur's help from time to time. And, you know, one of the things I try and do at harvest time, as well as trying to make good wine and make good decisions, is, you know, capture some imagery and make some videos and share some of the sort of sights and sounds of what we're up to. And I'm a very bad filmmaker, but I'm just going to see if I can put this into YouTube and show you. So what I need to do is stop this share and move to share screen, Firefox. We just go straight to that first and then share. Are you seeing the video playing?
Yeah.
Did I get nods? Good. I'll turn the volume up a bit. Can you hear the sound incidentally? I'll turn it up a bit. So sorry about that last shot. I forgot it was going to end in some nudity. Stop that one there. Go back to the slides. So yeah, you can see just a few images of the harvest. And this was the second vintage that we worked in Jean-Marc's cellar. So anyone who joined the last one may remember that we moved from my friend Richard making the wine and being kind of responsible for our grapes when we went around to my French friend Jean-Marc Lafarge. And he has a cellar called Chateau Saint-Roch. And we moved there in 2012. And so 2013 was the second year we'd worked there. And some of those images, some of those people were people in his team who help us. So his winemaker, Jose Luis, and a few other folk. We'll talk about it in a little while. But I hope that can sort of give you a short flavour of what we were up to. And you know, on the time-lapse picture, you may not have been able to read the captions, but we picked that block with 25 of us in 1 hour, which is pretty quick. You know, 25 people can pick through quite quickly. Didier, you came out to our harvest weekend and we picked a barrel between, 15 to 16 of us, but it took us about 2.5 hours to pick a barrel's worth, partly because we were kind of trying to help everyone understand what the right grapes to pick were, and a lot of people holding up bunches going, oh, is this bunch all right? And picking off individual grapes. And it was a very interesting exercise, but yeah, I probably wouldn't hire you as my permanent picking team. It's probably fair to say. The pickers who come are usually fairly used to fruit gathering in one way or another, and they pick quite quickly. Alex has joined us. Hello, Alex. Nice to see you. We're just on to the 2013 vintage, which, if you can hear me, Alex, I can see you've got your mute on and no camera, but if you can hear me, take the set of glasses out and pour them all out, and then we'll taste through one by one. So yeah, 2013.
Yes, hello everyone. Sorry.
Hi Alex, nice to see you. Nice to hear from you.
Wines have just landed, Justin.
Literally just now.
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry. I thought they were delivered yesterday. I'm sure I got an APC thing saying that. No, that's right. You rearranged them, didn't you? Yes. Well, I'm glad they finally arrived. So Alex wasn't in to collect them on Friday, and they said they'd re-deliver Tuesday, but obviously they've just chosen 7:20. Good. Well, good. Glad you're here. So where were we? Yeah, we've all just tasted the 2013. We're going to move on to the 15 in a minute. I'm just going to quickly go back to the screen share to have a look at a couple more pictures. So we should be back to the slides. There was also another link that I put in, which was, the 2014 harvest. So the reason we don't have a 2014 is because that bunch of grapes was, I wouldn't say typical, but that was a bad offender of what happened to our grapes in 2014. So remember that we're now in mid-October, and I'd been out there in early October and tasted the grapes and measured the sugars, and I was just going, these are not right. We definitely need to leave them longer. It's quite hard to tell when the grapes are ready to pick, and there's various things you can do. You measure the sugar level, you measure the acidity in the grapes, and those sort of numbers give you a good reading. But a much better metric really is to taste the grapes, taste the flavors, see if the flavors are beginning to develop. So as any fruit ripens, it starts off acidic and rather unpleasant to eat, and then it gradually builds delicious flavors as it gets riper, and it reaches a point where it reaches the peak of those flavors, and then it starts to go a little bit over and starts to go a little bit soft and wrinkly. Maybe if it's an apple, it's just gone past its perfect ripeness, and that can happen to grapes too. So what we're trying to do is plot that curve of kind of flavor, and then pick when the flavor is absolutely as expressive as it's going to be. But you've also got the tannins, which are in the skins and the pips, and also sometimes the stalks. And so really chewing the skins and biting the pips, which is not what you normally want to do with a wine grape, because they're quite small skins, small grapes with thick skins and hard pips. But that does give you a real feel for what the tannins are going to be like. So when I bite the pip and find it's really green, I think, now this is not ripe. I want to leave these further. So I left them further. I was actually doing some work down in Spain and went down to Spain for a few days and came back. But when we finally decided to pick, what had happened was, in that intervening sort of 2 or 3 weeks, some very small disease pressure that had already started just took off. They had the weather conditions for what's called acid rot to spread through the bunches. And that was partly fruit fly driven, and a little bug called odomys, which is a caterpillar that lays its eggs on the bunch of grapes, and the caterpillar eats into the bunch. So we had way more than we expected, bunches affected with bunch rot, sour rot, and we really had to pick hard. So if you see a bunch like that, you just chop it and leave it on the ground. It's clearly going nowhere near your wine. If you see a bunch with 5 or 6 grapes like that on it, but the rest look all right, you try and pick the grapes off one by one and then put the bunch in. We ended up throwing away about half the grapes that year, which is quite an expensive decision. And then we made wine from the rest, and we ended up, at the winery, we selected probably maybe 15 or 20% of the grapes and threw them away at that point, and then made wine from the rest, and decided that the wine was only okay. It really wasn't great. So we decided not to make any Domain of the Bee at all in 2014, which is why there's no 2014 glass in front of you. But those of you who've been with us for a while might remember it was the origin of the B-side, because the Grenache from that vintage, we just thought was too nice to throw away. We sold the Carignan back to Jean-Marc at about a third of the price it cost us to make it, just to get something back, because we just didn't think we could bottle a Domain of the Bee Carignan with that quality level. It just wasn't good enough. But we really liked the Grenache, albeit much lighter style, much sort of softer and fresher than our normal big Domain of the Bee style. So we decided to put that into a second label called the B-side, and launch that, and that turned out to be a huge success. But that year we made 1,300 bottles from the whole vintage, and it cost us 35 or 40,000 euros to grow and bring the grapes to ripeness. So kind of, you can see we lost rather a lot of money that year, but in retrospect, I think it was quite an important thing, because we really do only want to release wine when we think it's good enough, and knowing that you are prepared to declassify a whole harvest, I think, is an important consideration when you think about buying someone's wine, that you know they care enough about quality to do that.
Justin, could I ask? So is that the Carignan grape that we're looking at then, rather than Grenache?
I can't be absolutely sure. It's likely to be, because the Carignan was much worse affected by odomys than the Grenache, but even that year the Grenache was affected too. So I can't be sure, because those grapes don't look as a normal bunch would.
Yeah.
It could actually be Grenache because there are some rather paler colours. One of the problems with the eau de mise is you can see the grape goes slightly red because inside the grape, the little caterpillar is burrowed in, and basically the grape is a sort of shell with a sort of soft skin and nothing inside, and it tastes of vinegar. So the reason you don't want to put them in your wine is because you get a high level of VA, volatile acidity, and it tastes vinegary straight away. So the wine we made was really clean because we selected really hard, but you can see the material wasn't very promising.
Yeah.
So on to the 15 vintage, which mercifully was both a big and a wonderful vintage. So let's have a taste of that. And just for me, I've got immediately a bit more warmth, a bit more ripeness, and a bit more almost chocolatey, vanilla-y, chocolatey flavors going on there. I think that's just the grapes being riper. There's still some tannin. There's still a little bit of heat from the alcohol, but it seems more polished and more rich. And it's a wine I've been really enjoying drinking recently. If I pop round to my sister's house for Sunday lunch, I'll take a bottle of the 15. Is the preferred vintage of choice at the moment. I think it's just the right age to be really singing. I don't know what you think about it tonight. Anyone got any thoughts about this one compared to the 13? And if you disagree with my findings and you thought the 13 was richer, do say so. There's no such thing as the right answer when it comes to wine tasting. We've all got opinions.
Well, I'd say it's more my kind of wine than the 13. I preferred it. None of the, don't know the language, but you know what I mean. Mm. Good wine is what you enjoy.
Well, I should maybe not confess this to you, but my lovely friend Giles, whose partner Philippe is one of our business partners. Giles is quite an enthusiastic follower of our wines. But he tasted the 2013 fairly early on, and he said, "It's the first wine you've made I don't really like. Don't send me 2013 again. Not my style." And it's also interesting that there's a wine journalist who writes for Times called Jane McQuitty. She's very particular about her tastes and is very sure that she's right and everyone else is wrong. But she's very consistent, and I give her that. So she tasted some of our early wines and said, "Oh, they're far too rustic and rough for me. I prefer something more refined." And then when she actually, I sent her some 11 thinking she'd really love it. And she said, everyone else really loved it. I think it's one of the best wines we made. But Jane went, "No, sorry, I don't think this is good enough." And actually, maybe don't send me any more wine because 4 vintages in, I don't really like it. So maybe don't. When it came to 2013, I thought, actually, finally, this is a wine she might like. So I wrote to her and said, "Look, Jane, I know you told me not to send any wine again, but I think you're going to like this one." And she really did. And she wrote it up in the Times. And several journalists really rated it because it had more acidity and it was a bit lighter, slightly lower alcohol. And a lot of journalists seem to be into that. They believe that the mass public out there don't really want to drink big alcoholic wines, and everyone's moving towards lighter styles. And so the 13 was the wine that was most highly praised by several journalists at the time. But Giles didn't like it. Some of my other customers find it a bit light. I like it, but I don't think it's a great wine, but I think it's drinking very nicely now. So anyone other thoughts to contribute about that? Or let's
I'm getting between the 13 and the 15. Yeah. On the 13, it's fruity. I'm getting more flavors. I'm certainly getting more tertiary flavors with the 15. So I'm getting the chocolate, but I'm also getting a little bit of woody cedar. Mm-hmm. So in a light way. I really love both. This is my style of wine. I like big, bold, Priorat style wines. My wife would have loved 13 because all the fruit's there. It's got great acidity. I don't notice tannins so much. My wife is very susceptible to tannins. So I think she would have preferred the 13 slightly lower tannins to this one. Yep. But it's just got a lot more to it. So this is my favorite of the two.
Great. Good. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else do chip in, but I think, we're now nearly past, so we've theoretically got 4 more wines to do in another half an hour. So let's crack on to the 15. Well, I'll just show you, I just was going through my photographs and I started trying to do videos, and I've got quite a few mixed shots of. I just thought it'd be quite nice to talk. I took a few, from the stream of photos. I just do a square around it and took a few pictures. So this is the couple at the top with Santiago are Edmundo and Diana, who are a very nice Portuguese couple who work for Jean-Marc. So the winery we make our wine in is called Chateau Saint Roch. They live there in a flat, and they have been responsible throughout most of the time we've been working with Jean-Marc for looking after our vineyards. And actually both of them this year worked in the cellar. And young Santiago, who then was 3, I guess 2 maybe, yeah, I think he was only 2. He this year and last year made his own wine. So he's only 7 now, I think. And he asked apparently himself if he could take some grapes and make a wine. So Edmundo found him about 50 kilos of grapes, and he put them in a big tub. And Santiago kind of punched them down every day and did the work, and then put them in a bottle. And I had a bottle a few weeks ago and thought it was really pretty good. So he's only 7, but he's potentially going to be a winemaker to watch. But yeah, these are from 2015 when he was. He must have been one. He's a big lad, so I think he's only 1.5 there, probably, thinking about his age.
We saw him this year, I think, when we were in after our harvest.
Yes, you would have done. Yeah, he spends a lot of time helping his dad. He's got his own little tractor, not a real one, obviously, but he's very, very follows his dad around all the time and does everything his dad does. And that's where winemaking knowledge kind of seeps in. He may well just feel that career is in his blood as a result. I have to say now I've got an increasingly poor memory, and I do like the stream of photographs that you get because it just brings everything back and reminds you what the vintage was like. 15 was a lovely vintage, and warm and dry, and just really enjoyed the harvest, and the wine I think turned into a really lovely one. So we're going to move on to 16 now. So there's not much on these slides, not much to look at. Not much changes. Grenache Carignan blend 50-50. That's always a bit of a guess because we have different vineyards with different grapes in them, and a vineyard with very mixed grapes. And when they're mixed together, you can't, we pick them all together and throw them in the same vat. So we don't know exactly what the split is. So we tend to go for 50-50 because it's easy, but it's normally 46-54 or 48-52, somewhere around that. And we'll just estimate that at 50-50. Now, almost all of the wines weigh in around 15. And certainly, since we're on the subject of alcohol, are you all familiar with what the new alcohol regime is going to be? So, very briefly, the last budget, the Chancellor actually froze the duty rise that was planned, which normally would happen in early 2022. But he said from 2023, he's changing the whole way of calculating how duty gets paid. And at the moment, all wine between 8.5% and 15% pays the same duty rate. And what he's said he's going to do, and it all sounded at the time like this is an amazing concession to make some wines cheaper and a few wines more expensive. It's actually a huge tax grab because he's making the average wine much more expensive. So what he's done, he's taken the percentage of 11.5. If your wine's 11.5%, you'll pay the same rate you pay at the moment. If it's 12, 12.5, 13, 13.5, etc., each half degree up will mean you pay more tax. And if it's below 11.5, 11, 10.5 down to 8, you'll pay less tax. So our wines will end up paying something close to 90p more a bottle at 15% alcohol in tax and VAT, which is quite a lot. So we'll probably have to put the prices up when that comes in. It's not sure that it's going to come in because there's a consultation period and the wine trade is kind of coming back and going, hang on, you sold this as a sort of neutral or making wine cheaper budget, but actually it's a massive tax grab. You're going to make loads more money from wine. But he's put the duty on beer and cider down. And that's, the whole point of having it linked to the alcohol percentage is that it's fair across the different alcohols. But the amount per unit paid for beer and cider is way lower than the amount per unit paid for wine and spirits. So I don't want to feel like I'm sounding off at you, but it does feel very inequitable, and we're definitely going to be lobbying to try and change that as an industry. but it sounds like he's got his heart set on that idea. And I don't mind the idea of higher alcohol, pay higher tax. It is a bureaucratic nightmare and will cause a lot of logistic issues. You know, a wine changes 0.5% 1 year to the next, you've got to change the price. It won't be welcomed, but you know, it is kind of fair. But the tilt point should be 13%, not 11.5%. And then this will be about balanced. The tax take will be about the same, but the highest percentage wines will pay more than less. Anyway, long diatribe saying that ours are all around 15%. Sometimes they're 15.2, sometimes they're 14.8, but somewhere in that area, we tend to put 15 on the label. And legally, you're allowed to be within 0.5% of the actual alcohol on the label. So we don't go for 15.2, 15.3. In England, normally people just say 15 or 15.5. So we tend to go for the one that's nearest, or usually slightly lower than nearest. So 2016. Yeah, I don't think it's quite as open as the 15, but it's quite punchy. There's quite a lot of bright fruit still there. Quite chewy as well, perhaps a bit more young tannin. And I'm also just picking a tiny bit of oak flavor that I can still tell is just oak rather than integrated seamless oak. So for me, this is probably not quite yet in its optimum drinking. It's probably got another year or two to round out, but I think it's a pretty good wine. I was pretty happy with 16 when we made it. My take on it would be it's a notch less good than 15, but it could come around and be as good. I don't know. There's no right or wrong when you come to these things. Anyone else got any thoughts about the 16 versus the 15?
So Justin, the less bottles, about what was it, about 20% less bottles that were made this time? Is that reflected in the wine, in that it's a bit more concentrated and less rounded? Or I mean, I like it because I can feel a lot more tannin. I think it's quite strong, and as you say, in a year or so time, it feels like it'll be in the same place as the 15.
Yep. Well, that's a very good point. When we started in 7 and 8, we put all our grapes into whichever wine, the one wine that we made, which is Domain of the Bee. And the very first vintage, we had one of our lowest yields. So we only had 3,000 bottles. The next vintage, we had 5,200 or something. And one of the good things about 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 is all of those years have produced a higher yield than we were getting in 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 12. And some of that yield is better farming. Some of that yield is feeding our grapevines a bit more. We only use organic fertilizers, but feeding the vines a bit more and balancing them a bit better and understanding how to grow them a bit better. So we've had a bigger crop each year. And what that's enabled me to do is to take the best barrels, the most concentrated barrels, and put them into Domain of the Bee, and then take any barrels that are a bit lighter or don't quite make the grade and declassify them. Because we had a big success with the B side, we've been under a lot of pressure to keep repeating it. So I take out the lighter Grenache, and sometimes I borrow a bit of Jean-Marc's Grenache. So in some vintages, it's been 50-50 my Grenache and Jean-Marc's, and in the most recent vintage, 100% our own grapes. But it's allowed to be as much as I like, actually, of Jean-Marc's grapes, because it's not a domain wine. So we do have this chance now in the Grenache, the B-side Grenache, and also the Carignan that we made in 2016, which was the first vintage we made it, to take out the slightly lighter barrels and put them into those sort of slightly lesser wines. So in 16, we actually had quite a lot of Carignan and a bit less Grenache. So I thought if we blended them all together, we'd end up with too much. We didn't make a B-side. We didn't have enough Grenache, and we had too much Carignan. So before I took the decision that we were going to change the Domain of the Bee blend and not all the Carignan in it, I showed the buyer for Obbins the Carignan and said, would you be interested? And she said, I'll take half of it. So we made 1,000 litres and she took half for Obbins, which was great to get a wine into Obbins. And it also gave me the confidence that she liked the wine and it was good enough as a standalone Carignan. So we could have made 5,000 or 6,000 bottles of Domain of the Bee 16, but it would have been 70% Carignan, and it would have contained the two lighter Carignan barrels. But by selling them to odd bins, we created a new market. We obviously got quite a lot less for the wine, but we kept the concentration of the 16 exactly where we wanted it to be. You know, the Main of the Bee needs to be a big, rich, full-flavored wine. That's what people have grown to really like, and that's what I'm trying to make every year. And the fact that I can make some lighter styles and sell them for slightly less is great from my point of view commercially. But I want to make sure that the Main of the Bee is as similar as it can be every year to how it normally is. So yeah, 3,000.
Sorry, can I just ask, Justin? I think you're given, what is it, 0.5% either way or something like that, aren't you, on the 15%? But my amateur take is that the 15 is going to be closer to 15.4 and the 16 is close to 14.6 or well. There seems to be, I feel, quite a big difference on alcohol level, which can't be that big, but I think it's, for personally, it seems noticeable.
I'd be very interested to check the numbers. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. You may well be right, but you know, it's always a good idea to check what the analysis says. And then also there's the pre-bottling analysis, and well, so what happens when you do a blend is you taste all the barrels, you then make up little bench blends where you say, well, it's going to be these 6 barrels and those are 500 litres and that one's a 225. So I'll take 50 mils of each of those and 22.5 mils of that, blend it together in a little bottle and then taste it. Then you'll work out that that's, you know, the blend you want. You then get that tested for alcohol. Then you make the actual blend and you test that for alcohol to check your labels are correct. Then you print the labels and then you bottle the wine. And then, you know, if a tiny bit of water gets into the wine, because you're putting water in between the wines when you filter them, the alcohol will end up being a bit lower. So there's always, and you obviously try very hard to make sure there's no water in the wine. So, but there is some variation between what you think the alcohol is going to be and what it turns out to be and what it says on the label. And you hope, this is one of the reasons you're allowed a 0.5 degree amount of flex in case, you know, analyses also vary. So you can vary by 0.2 or so when you do an analysis. So I don't know for sure, but I'd have to check back on the analyses what the final alcohol on that wine is. But you may be right. The 15 was certainly a nice, ripe, warm vintage, and the 16 was a bit tighter and a bit more tannic. But look, let's move on to 17. Just some pictures from 16 randomly. Yeah, there's not much to say there. This was that the first year Jean-Marc put the lift in? No, it wasn't. Yeah, we were hoisting. See where the bottom left here, that little place there. We had a hoist that sort of came down from above. You could put the barrel on a pallet and it would scoop up the pallet and lift it back up to the top. And Jean-Marc concluded after a couple of years of doing that, it's quite dangerous that you're dangling a 0.5-ton barrel above the ground, 20, 30 feet above the ground, and sort of swinging it in higher above. And he's now put in a proper lift. So now you can wheel the barrel, the pallet into the lift, press the button and send it up to the top floor and take it out. But this is, I think, one of the last years where we had that lift. Right, we had the pulley. Also, 2016 was the year of my 50th birthday. So this is our local restaurant, the Pichenerie, which is a great place for kind of informal get together. And we had 30 or so people gathered together, local friends and vignerons and a few visitors for celebrating my 50th. So that's what I particularly remember about this vintage. Let's move on to the 17, which we have in glass number 4.
Just press the screen.
There's lots to smell there. It's also quite a deep colour. I don't know if you're comparing the colours, but 17 was a year we had magnificent colours, and it was one of those vintages where you just knew everything was going to come out right. The fruit was delicious, the colours were excellent, the juices tasted amazing, and there's just been this burst of fruit through everything. Sometimes wines are quite closed and quite intense and concentrated and have lots of promise, but they don't shout fruit. And other times you get very light, fruity styles that just have fruit and not much more. But 17 is one of those years which I think there was a lot of very good fruit evident from the beginning, but with a lot of weight and a lot of ripeness and richness. It's a lovely, broad, mouth-coating feel. and quite a mineral slatiness as well to it. I think this is quite a serious wine with good aging potential, and we thought this would run for 10 years at least. We also put this into magnums because we last did magnums in 2012, and although we had quite a few left, we thought actually this is a year which deserves to go into magnums, and we've probably we put about 200 magnums down. I think we sold about half of them now. But if you want some wine for the long term, and to put some wine in the cellar to last another 10 years, I'd probably buy 2 or 3 magnums of this and stick it away, because I think it's going to be great. It's also a bountiful year. We made 5,700 bottles, and we made the B side. We didn't make any Carignan. It was a good Grenache year, so we had plenty of Grenache, and we also made a Déjeuner. So you can see the volume of wine we made in 17 was one of the best years we'd had. And yeah, I mean, anyone agree with me, or anyone think actually not so keen on this one?
It feels to me, it feels like it's very round. It's got a huge amount of depth, but at the same time slightly less tannin than the 2016. So it feels like it's got more longevity in it, but less tannin, which is confusing for a generalist. I
think the tannin is certainly softer. So while I think there's quite a lot of tannin there, it's ripe and rich and soft, and it doesn't have that rasping edge that the 16 tannins do. So
delicious. This is really good.
I think it will last. I think it's very balanced, and I think it will continue to last. But yes, I mean, it'd be interesting to see the 16 and the 17 together in 5 or 10 years' time and see how they're comparing. I mean, I think one of the biggest crimes in wine is to keep a wine beyond the point where it's any longer enjoyable to drink, and sometimes that happens as wines age. And I'm not sure that our wines, get better and better and better and better to 10 and 15 and 20 years, and are going to keep on improving. For my money, they're probably at their best between 2 and 7 years old, and that after that they hold very well, and they will still taste good in 10 or 15 years, but maybe they don't improve. But then that's all about personal taste, and some people love older wine and love the way it ages, and certain wines definitely flower at 20 or 25, 30 years old. I'm just not claiming any of that for our wines, partly because I want people to buy and drink them, but also because we just don't have the longevity to be able to say that we know that that they're going to last that long. So anyone else want to comment on the 17 before we move on to the 18 and 19?
Justin, just a few thoughts from me. I think I agree with the comments so far. I think 16 and 17 both can age quite a bit more compared to the 15, which I think is pretty much ready to go, and I don't think it will add much more if you keep it. Yep. I agree with the comments on the tannins. I think both have still quite a bit of tannin, so that to me suggests you could probably keep these a bit longer. And yeah, the 17 is definitely finer tannins, a bit more fruit, and as you say, it's probably rounder on the mouth, on the palate. But they're both of them very good wines, and I've enjoyed both. Whereas I said the 15 there's a lot of tertiary, I think, there. So if you like your fruity wines, you'll probably go for 16, 17, and if you like your wines with a bit more of tertiary flavors and characters, then I think the 15 will be your wine.
Lovely, thank you very much. Let's have a quick flick to see a couple of photographs. Oh yeah, I was looking at the photographs. I thought I don't want to send the same pictures all the time. We have an olive tree outside our house, and we had a magnificent olive harvest this year, and I was there late enough to pick and process them, and so I don't know, we made about 8 or 9 kilos of olives, and from the same tree. As we picked them, I divided them into ones that were fully black, ones that were a bit half, almost Kalamata style, and ones that were still green, and just bottled them in separate jars. They were the same olives. And yeah, they were very good, really rather delicious. And slightly bizarrely, we had an olive tree in London, and last year we had the most stunningly ripe olives. I say last year, what are we now? So yeah, the year before this year. We had absolutely spectacularly ripe olives and managed to ripen them to the point you can eat them. So it's very rare to have London olives that you can actually brine and eat. But having learned how to do it in France, this is the first time I'd ever done it. I realized you could do it with a couple of kilos of olives that we picked off our tree in England. So I don't know. I'm beginning to form the theory that great fig years are great wine years, but I didn't have enough pictures of amazing figs to prove that in this instance. But yeah, the figs in our tree, when they're good, are absolutely stunning. So that's usually a good sign that the wine's going to be good too. So let's move on to the 18. We've got 15 minutes or so left before you all may want to drift off and eat something. Stick our noses in the 18 and have a smell. Colour is decent, probably not quite as deep as the 17. And it's just a little pinky at the edge, but it's beginning to sort of mature into its rich red. And I'm not getting a huge amount on the nose. I don't know who else agrees with me, but there's something there, but it's not booming out with lovely ripeness and complexity. There's a little bit of fruit, a little bit of slate. Yeah, and on the tannin, good tannin there, nice ripe tannin, not excessive, and it's, as a young wine, it's not just tannin and no fruit. I think there's some nice ripe fruit. I think it's a good year, possibly not a great year. Anyone pick up anything on the oak? I'm quite interested to hear about your feeling about oak, because we added something at this sort of stage which we hadn't used before.
I'm getting a slight spiciness that I didn't get with the other vintages.
Yeah, and could you define that spiciness a bit more precisely? Is there anything? Is it cinnamony? Is it?
It's pushing me a little bit down the mulled wine route. So I am going slightly cinnamon sticky.
Cinnamon, star anise, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it may well be a byproduct of what we did. I forget which year we very first started. It might have been 17, but I think it was 18. Was we bought an American oak barrel. Now, there are various different species of oak tree, and American oak is a species rather than it comes from America. Actually, a lot of oak grown in Spain is American oak. It's a wider grained species, and it grows quicker and makes slightly less fine barrels. One of its great advantages is it's about 2/3 of the price of a new French oak barrel. And one of the things we wanted to do was buy a really expensive French oak barrel. So I think it was 18 was the first year that we split our barrel buying from buying 3 of the same French oak barrel to buying 1 French oak barrel, 1 really expensive French oak barrel, and paying for that by having 1 American oak barrel. And it has introduced a slightly more, you tend to get a bit more vanilla and coconut flavors. But yes, that toasting and the sort of spice profile will have changed very subtly. We tend to use the American oak barrel for the Carignan because it seems to work better with the Carignan than it does with the Grenache. And obviously with 1 barrel out of 10 or 12 barrels that we use in a particular year, you don't get a very high proportion of it, so you don't have a very noticeable influence. And in the domain of the B blend, it might be 6 barrels made to make that blend, of which 1 would be a new American oak barrel. So you're picking up a little bit of new oak, but not an overwhelming amount, I think. And it can also make the wine a bit more approachable, a bit younger, and slightly sort of strawberry jam and vanilla flavor. The vanilla component and the coconut component can be a bit higher, as I said. I've been quite happy with them. I just prefer it when I can't sort of immediately, first of all, smell American oak. As long as it's in the background, I'm pretty happy with it. So we only made 3,500 barrels from 18. And if you remember, this was the year that we would have shipped last year in April, or bottle in March and shipped in April for sale in May. But that was the year where lockdown got in the way and we were unable to bottle it. The bottling was cancelled and postponed until June. Now, obviously, we had some wine to sell. We had our annual club shipment, which normally we get our wine shipped over in mid to late April and start selling it in May. And if we had to wait for this wine to arrive, we would have had nothing to sell. So we went back to our back catalogue and realised we had enough stock of 17, 18, 17, 16, 15. And actually, I think we decided the 16 was the wine that we had that we thought was the best one to sell. So all the people who normally took the latest vintage kindly agreed to take the 16. What that meant was that when the 18 arrived in July, it didn't have a chance to get in front of our regular customers, and lots of people who normally buy our wine never got the 18. So we did an offer in September and sold about 1,000, just over 1,000 bottles in September. But obviously with a small amount made, 3,500, we haven't really sold the volume we'd normally expect to have sold. So we've still got 2,000 bottles of this. And I'm happy to think we do, because we didn't make a lot, and it's, as you can see from our stock profile, we like to keep some older vintages. The very first wine we had, the 13, we've got 300 bottles left. We've got 600 and something left of the 15. We've got 900 something of the 16. So that's about 2,000 is about the right amount of 2018 to be holding now, so that in a few years' time we still got a few hundred bottles left. But you know, it's good to know that it's there, and I think it'll come around and become a very nice wine, if not quite at the level of the 17 and maybe the 15 and perhaps the 11 or 10, which I think are sort of some of our most famous years so far.
So Justin, this is the first one it hasn't been quoted as 50-50 on the grape. And also you say it's a Domain of the Bee flagship red. So you're saying this is the one to watch?
No, so I call Domain of the Bee, this label, our flagship wine. It's the wine we make every year. It's the one we hang our hat on. We only make Genou when we can in the best years. And obviously the B-side is our second label. And then the Carignan is a kind of, when we make it when we need to make it. So this is absolutely the flagship of the fleet, if you like. I never thought I'd have a fleet of wines, but there you go. We just set out just to make this one wine, but yeah, we call it our flagship for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a year when I had Otto with me for the vintage, and just a few random photographs, including some pictures of soil, which is very intriguing, I'm sure. But yeah, I've got absolutely hundreds of photographs, and I sometimes think I should curate them a bit more carefully and do more with them. But you know, life's too short, and you know, it's nice for me to be able to go back and look at them. But there isn't really a big and easily accessible catalogue of photographs. I just you know, tweet them and Instagram them, and occasionally make a film or put them into a newsletter, and then after that they're been and gone. But
can I just ask a tedious question? As you mentioned soil, how would you describe it in the different areas of your overall?
Well, great question, and very topical, because this year I've been getting quite interested in soil, more so than I've ever been before, and I've actually been sort of digging out little patches of the vineyard to try and understand how the soil works, and doing things like water infiltration tests, which is pouring water through a sort of in a ring that you've kind of driven into the ground, and seeing how long it takes to sort of settle into the soil, to work out how porous the soil is. Essentially, in the Moree Valley, our main soil type is schist, and what you can see on the two bottom right pictures is fragments of black schist, which is a kind of slate, but not the lovely Welsh slate that stays in squares. It breaks into little pieces. It's quite friable. And two of our vineyards, the Combe de Roy and the La Roque vineyard, are basically schist with a bit of clay. The other vineyard is the Bac Genèvre, which is on a sort of limestone bench, but it also has quite a lot of red soil, so it's a bit more iron in the soil and a bit of limestone. So it's not really schist at all. And there are little parts of the valley which have patches of soil that are different. And I'm still not sure how much effect the soil has. The schist of Moree is quite famous, and possibly correlates a bit with the chocolatey flavors that Moree famously has, but that might just be the heat of the sun and the grape varieties, and not actually the schist that's contributing that. But schist as a soil type is quite sought after and occurs in places that are quite prestigious for making wine, like the Douro Valley. Moselle is very slaty. There's quite a few other places in the world that have slaty soils, and actually Priorat, that I think John you mentioned, didn't you, has a famous type of slate which is called Licorea, which is a kind of brown schist. And that's the main soil type of Priorat. And we share quite a lot of characteristics with Priorat as a region.
It keeps the warmth, doesn't it? I think it sort of reflects the warmth up at night.
Yes, essentially there's very little earth and lots of stone, and when the black stone sort of soaks up the heat from the sun, it absolutely radiates it back to the vines. But we don't lack for warmth around us. So I'm not sure that the schist vineyards are always warmer than the ones next door that are not schisty. It's a very complex subject. It's really hard to be sure what the influence of the soil is, but it's definitely part of the character of Moree wine that it's part of the schist area. And there's a plateau where our house is, which is actually granite. And in fact, one of the interesting, if you're interested in soil, there's probably 6 major soil types of wine: chalk, limestone, granite, schist, others I can't quite bring to mind. But our region, the Roussillon, has 5 of the 6. It doesn't have any chalk, but it has all the others. And there's very few wine regions that have got more than 1 or 2 soil types, but we've got them all, so except for the chalk. So it's a pretty unusual region for that reason. Okay, I think we should just taste the 2019 as our last wine. This is the first wine that we actually put under a different appellation, and it's exactly the same grapes from exactly the same vineyards, but there is a new appellation in our valley. The valley. Well, it's the Agly Valley, but the main town is Moree, and Moree is a French fortified wine, a bit like a port. And for a long time, they really didn't want to put the word Moree on a wine unless it was the Moree Vin du Naturel, naturally sweet wine, but actually it's not natural, it's fortified, but that's what they call it. But the growers of Moree got together and said, no, we want to make a dry table wine from Moree, and we want to call it Moree. So they've agreed that it's going to be called Moree Sec, or it is now called Moree Sec, which is dry Moree. And so this is the first wine that we've made. All our vineyards are able to be classified as Moree Sec, but we have formally classified a couple of parts of a couple of the blocks as Moree Sec, and we make Domaine de Bie now as a Moree Sec and also Les Genoux. And it makes no difference at all to the wine, except that the mandatory minimum proportion of Grenache is 60%. So we just edged up the Grenache component of this one to 60, which makes it slightly lighter in color, but only a touch. I don't think it's really changed much about the wine. Most of the difference, if you find a difference, will be just the vintage conditions. This is another wine that's benefited from having the most concentrated barrels, because 2019 was, if it was marked by anything, it was marked a bit by rain just before harvest. So we had a bit of dilution in a couple of barrels, and actually 2020 also we've got a slight dilution. But I think in this one, you hardly notice it. It's very concentrated. It's very big and rich, and slightly more new oak perhaps, because we only made 2,870 bottles of this, which meant it had a slightly higher proportion of newer barrels. We normally buy 3 new barrels a year, and probably 2 of the new barrels are in this wine. The other one would be in the Genoux. I'd love to hear what you think about 18 and 19 as a pair, and what you think about their characteristics and longevity. They're 2 wines I haven't spent much time with. I've obviously tasted lots of the others and drunk quite a few bottles of the others. I haven't drunk many 18s or 19s yet, so I'm sort of exploring them with you.
Justin, I think the 19 is fruitier, it's juicier as well. And I feel like it has more vanilla in it than 18 does, just relatively speaking. And I think the 19 is also a little bit rounder on the palate than 18 is, my view. So I don't know which one will age better, honestly, because I like 19 to drink as it is. Maybe the 18 will actually last longer, I don't know.
I think the 18 is a bit more slightly raw, rustic tannin, whereas the 19 seems quite polished and rounded. But yeah, no, thank you. Anyone else, any thoughts?
I get more alcohol on the 19 than on the 18. I definitely taste the alcohol quite strongly on the 19.
Yeah. I'm, again, trying to remember the stats, and I don't have them in front of me, but yeah, the vast majority of the time our wines come out somewhere between 14.6 and 15.4. And I don't think either of them was notably high. So I think they're probably just at or around 15. But I think it does feel that the 19 is a bit of a richer, fuller flavored wine. I was sort of expecting, knowing that it was a slightly rained on vintage, that it would be a bit more dilute. But I think because we focused the selection of the barrels that went to Domaine of the Bee on the more concentrated ones, it's actually compensated for that. So the 19 Carignan is slightly lighter than the 18 Carignan, and the 19 B-side, we had enough Grenache to make that entirely from our own fruit. And a little secret, we actually made a barrel of rosé in 2020. We used that rosé in the B-side 2019. You're allowed to put, I think, 15% of wine from a different year into any wine from Europe, but we just felt that the freshness of the rosé, it was quite a deep coloured rosé. It was not a B pink style rosé. It was when you pick your grapes, and if you've had the recent rain, what happens is the grapes swell up, they suck up water, and they end up with a slightly dilute flavour, and it reduces the potential alcohol. So what we do with our barrels that we think the dilution's gone a bit far is we bleed them. So we sort of crush the grapes, have some grape soup, we stick a pipe in and we suck out 40 or 50 litres from the barrel. And then we collect those 40 or 50 litres together into another barrel and ferment them. And we've done that the last 2 or 3 years in order to concentrate the barrel, but also to make this sort of byproduct that we could have thrown away or we could have just given to Jean-Marc, but I said, no, we're going to make it into a wine. And we made some pretty tasty dark coloured rosés, but we didn't feel we could bottle them as a dark rosé because that would confuse everyone who's used to the lovely, delicate B pink. So the natural suggestion was to blend it back in with the B side and make a lighter, juicier, fruitier red style with a slightly paler colour and a bit more fruit. So that's what we did with the B side 19, which I think is a really nice wine, incidentally. If you're not familiar with it, I would grab a bottle because it's going very quickly. We have very little left.
Justin, just a question on the change in blend slightly from the earlier vintages moving towards 18 and 19 with less Carignan. Is that driven by a choice in having more Grenache in the blend or other factors? Well,
in this particular vintage, and for every vintage that we continue to make Maury Sec, we will be required to make 60% of the blends Grenache. So just an insight into the appellation process. It's quite an interesting process because it seems like it's handed down by the French authorities. So this is what you've got to do, but it's actually driven by the growers. So the growers of Maury made a representation that they thought, well, let's just rewind a couple of stages. The top level of an appellation hierarchy is a cru, CRU, a cru, and that's only awarded if the INAO, the appellation authority, thinks there's a track record of extremely high quality from that village or region. So in the Rhône, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Gigondas, Vacuras, Tavel, there's a few cru from the Rhône, and in the north, Creux-Hermitage and Saint-Joseph, etc., that are allowed to be as a region on their own. And everything else in the south of the Rhône is a Côte de Rhône. So all the villages that are in the Côte de Rhône are not good enough to be considered a cru, but they are considered good enough to add their name to Côte de Rhône. So Côte de Rhône village Valréas is a village that's good enough to have its own name, but it's not good enough to be a cru. In the Roussillon, the only cru are Collioure by the sea, Banyuls, Maury Vin du Naturel, and now Maury Sec, which has jumped straight to be a cru. And so the growers of Maury wanted to petition that it should be a cru on its own, but they had to agree. So what they did is they basically discussed what a Maury should be, what a dry Maury should be, when one hadn't existed before. And they agreed what they thought it should be and put it forward, and that was approved. So it was a choice of the growers of Maury, the collective choice. Some disagreed, some thought the rules should be different, but they kind of collectively came up with it's 60 to 80% Grenache. So Maury is really Grenache country. Some people were saying, come on, we can make 100% Grenache and still call it Maury Sec. But most of the growers agreed it had to have a bit of Carignan or a bit of Mourvèdre or a bit of Syrah in it. So the rules are 60% to 80% Grenache. and then at least one other grape from a list of 3 or 4, which includes those ones I mentioned. And I forget, there's a few more rules, but that's basically it. So if you adhere to those rules and you have a vineyard within the region and you've classified that vineyard for Mori Sec, then you can make a Mori Sec. And then you have to pay a bit more in fees to the authorities that supports the promotion of the appellation. So we chose to do it because we had vineyards in the area. We believe in the appellation. We want to think our wine is a Mori wine and not just a Côte de Roussillon. And yeah, I think it's been a good decision. I'm pretty happy to have chosen that. Anyone here would choose to buy a wine and pay more money for it because it was a Mori Sec? I mean, it's probably a new appellation, so you probably got no premium in your mind, but we're hoping it's going to be a name like Priorat, whereas Catalonia doesn't mean as much as Priorat in Spain. Equally, Roussillon doesn't mean as much as Mori. So I'm hoping one day it will be well regarded as a premium appellation.
So Justin, after this talk, I think I'd have to definitely agree with you. We spend more money on, maybe 90 pence more, which is the duty.
Yeah.
Very, very excited to have listened to you talk about your wines. It's really cool.
Well, thank you. And the 90 pence, just but incidentally, involves no markup for the grower. So we're not making any more money if we charge you 90p more. So we probably ought to charge you £1.50 more.
Well, we'll watch the space.
I'm reluctant to put the prices up, but there are various reasons that we might have to, and I'll try and balance it so that everyone's happy. But also, inflation is coming along, so there's lots of reasons why prices are going up across the board. And we put our prices up to £25 a bottle about 8 years ago, and we haven't moved it since. So, and obviously, club members get it for 20. I also have a policy which I maybe canvass you on, which is, when a wine's 2 or 3 years old and I've stored it for 2 or 3 years, I put the price up to 30 quid. And that's partly because the older vintages are getting rarer, and partly because I think, someone deserves the extra money for having stored the wine, but also for you guys to think, well, I'm buying this for 20 quid. And therefore, it's good to see the prices going up. And, I'm the only one who determines the prices. I sell the wine. So whether it's worth that or not is up to you, but that's the policy. And yeah, I sort of plan to stick to it, I think. So the job, my job is to try and, run a business that can keep on doing what it's doing without enriching anyone too much, or certainly it's not enriching me. I still haven't paid myself anything, by the way. But this year, finally, we'll actually make a reasonably good profit, which I'm pleased to see. So anyone who wants to become a shareholder in future, I don't want to make out this is a very unprofitable business. This year we'll do quite well, and next year as well with your help.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we're a bit over time now, so I'm conscious some of you may well want to drift off, but very, very thankful to you for joining us on this journey, and really enjoyed your company. And thanks for your thoughts and comments. I'm happy to stay on and chat a bit longer if there's a couple more questions. So do please fire away. But anyone who does want to drift off at this point, thank you very much. And it's been lovely sharing a glass or two with you on, I can't remember what evening it is, Tuesday evening.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Absolutely great. Really, really enjoyable. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and nice to see you. Any further questions before we knock off?
Justin, I have 2 questions. One is, you do make a Côte de Roussillon also, right? So how is that different from the Côte Rhône Village and the Mori Sec? Meaning, is the grape composition different, or do you age that lesser, or what's different about that? That's my first question.
So
And then,
in most years, the domain of the bee has been a Côte de Roussillon Village.
Yeah.
But in 2019, it entirely became a Mori Sec.
Okay.
So
Got it.
we have, so the wines we make are Les Genoux, which is also changed to be Mori Sec, domain of the bee, and then the Grenache and the Carignan, which are 100%. They, in France, generally, if it's an appellation, it has to be a blend. That's a big generalization. It's not true in Burgundy and some other places, but in lots of places where they have an appellation, they define a blend. And if you make 100% varietal wine, you can't call it the name of the appellation. So our 100% varietal wines are Côte de Roussillon, sorry, are IGP, Côte Catalan. So that's what the B-side and the Carignan are. So yes, in 2019, we didn't make a Côte de Roussillon Village red. we just made Mori Sec, 2 Mori Secs, and 2 Côte Catalane.
Got it. And how's your Les Genoux different? And is it that from 2019 there's no more Les Genoux from 2020 onwards? Is it all just Mori Sec?
No, so Les Genoux is a cuvée of primarily just one vineyard site, which is the oldest 100-year-old vineyard. Very, very mixed field blend of lots of different grapes. And actually one small part of the Bac Genève vineyard, which is also a mixed field blend. So between those, we make 2 or 3 or 4 barrels, and then we choose the best 1 or 2 barrels to put into Les Genoux. Those vineyards happen to be in Mori Sec area, and this year I thought we wanted to make it a Mori Sec. I may choose not to in a future year, but I'd like it to be respected as a Mori Sec. I think we just got written up in Decanter, which is coming out in January with the Genoux, which is good news. I haven't seen the score or the write-up yet, but they asked me to advertise. That's usually a sign your wine's done okay. I'm not going to, by the way, because we don't have an advertising budget, but just in case you're wondering.
Justin, just a quick question, follow up on the Mori Sec appellation. Now that it's got its own appellation, do you see growers perhaps, the appellation growing and therefore growers perhaps producing dry wines in the region?
Yes, I mean they are already, and they have been for a while, for the main reason that people just don't drink Mori sweet much anymore. So the sales have been going down steadily, and people are now wondering what to do with the grapes if they can't make the money out of making Mori Sec. So more and more good producers have been making dry red wine, and the fact that they can now call it Mori Sec gives them a chance to, for a group of them to really push forward and say this is a high quality wine. One of my issues at the moment is that some of the best people are still not making it as Mori Sec. They're just calling it Côte Catalane or just calling it Côte de Roussillon Village. And I think the more that do, the more the Mori Sec name sort of grows in stature and becomes genuinely something to look for.
So one quick question: if you conquer, as you are, the world of Mori Sec, are you then going to produce a Mori? So a sweet one to add to the.
Adam, would you buy some?
Well, I reckon so. Absolutely. If it was good quality, absolutely right.
So I would love to make a Mori, but I know that we won't sell much of it. And I know that partly because I used to work for Laithwaites, and they have a grower in the area they make wine with, and they make some very, very good, like 2 or 3 Mori-based red wines. And every 3rd or 4th year, they make a barrel of Mori Vin du Naturel, and they put it into half bottles, and they every time they show it at a tasting, people love it, and lots of people buy a bottle or 2, but they only have 600 bottles or 800 bottles, and they don't sell it very quickly, and they don't make it every year because they don't sell it very quickly. So it's one of those wines that you show at a tasting and people buy a bottle, but no one buys a case. And a bit like the Magnums, I was quite surprised how slowly the Magnums sell, actually. They're not vastly fast sellers. They're vastly more.
Not in this house. They're great sellers.
Well, they are lovely wines, and they do. People who appreciate them. There are about 10 people who buy a case of Magnums and put them down, but most other people buy them as a present. 1 bottle here, 1 bottle there, and they're more expensive than 2 bottles because the labels are. First Magnums we made, the labels cost €5 a set of labels. Believe it or not, because the cost of producing the bigger label and the cutter and the embosser and all the rest of it, it's not you're not making any money from the Magnums, but they don't. If they sold a lot quicker, I'd do more of them. So yes, I'd happily do Mori Vin du Naturel. I'd really love to do a barrel, and we will do one day, but it also requires technical skills, and Jean-Marc only makes it occasionally. So I'll need to work with Jean-Marc and say, could we make a barrel in his program? And because you have to buy neat industrial alcohol from the government, and it's the process of making it is quite isolated.
Presumably you need different. Do you need different tanks to make it in, or will you would have it in the?
We'd make it in a barrel because we ferment a lot of our wines in a barrel, and if we made Mori Sec, we'd only want maximum 500 litres of it, because that would take us 3 or 4 years to sell at least.
Yeah.
So if we made a 500 litre barrel, actually what we probably do is want to make a 225 litre barrel. So we'd do a fermentation, but the way you make Morey Sec is you start fermenting the grapes. So the way you make Vin du Naturel, you start fermenting the grapes, and when about 6 or 7% of the alcohol has been converted to alcohol and the rest of the sugar remains, you throw in neat alcohol to about 18 or 20%, which then arrests all further fermentation because the yeast don't like suddenly being shocked with that much alcohol. And you then have a sort of sweet fortified style, and then you press it, I think, with Morey, and then you put it into a barrel and keep it, and then you bottle it when it's ready. But it's a sweet fortified style made by adding alcohol, and so that the skill of how to do that and when to do it is not something I possess. And if Jean-Marc is doing it for 2 or 3 other barrels in his cellar, I will definitely say, yeah, we're up to make a barrel of ours. But we need to have a barrel we know is the right blend of grapes to fulfill the appellation requirements. And yeah, maybe next year.
Why don't you pre-sell it to club members?
Yeah.
Sell us all a half case. You get 100, and then at least you know you've sold 600 bottles.
Yeah, I think we've struggled to get 100 club members to
I don't know how many members. I don't know how many members you've got.
We have 400 members, but
yeah.
I think how persuadable they would be to buy 6 bottles of a wine they haven't tasted that's sweet and fortified.
Curiosity. I'm curious to try
there
it.
would be some. There are definitely, I hope 20 or 30 would happily do that. I also think another 100 would happily buy a bottle, but I don't think we'd pre-sell 600 bottles.
I just picked a number. You know, I'm an accountant. But I would like.
I think I would like decision to do something without having to justify it. One of the, if we'd had to do a business plan before we bought the first vineyard, we'd probably have talked ourselves out of it. The joy of being able to do it is just saying, well, we're going to do it anyway, and then see what happens, which is how best decisions get made, I think. So I think we will do it.
It sounds like Adam and I would buy some.
Okay, good. I'll do that.
That's 2. Thanks.
A bit of waving from the Parsons family. Are you wanting to say something? You're just putting your thumbs up. Excellent news.
Well, it's Parsons and Gordy, actually.
Sorry, speak up a little bit. I couldn't quite hear that.
And it's Parsons and Gordon.
Parsons and Gordon. Oh, yes, indeed, Gordy. Yeah, nice to see you. Well, nice to see you all. And look, I think probably now is the time to shoot off and grab whatever we had planned for supper. It's been really lovely tasting with you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
This will be available at some point if it has recorded successfully. I think it is still recording. I will post it somewhere and send you a link just in case you want to share it with any friends. And actually, what I will do, I've got about 10 or 12 sets of the mini bottles left over that I bottled that will be available to buy as presents. So if you wanted to buy someone a present for Christmas and send them a vertical, I think it'll be 45 quid rather than 55 without the live Zoom. And yeah, that'd be a lovely thing for you to do, and maybe a nice present for you to give. And this video will be available for people to watch after the event. So yeah, thanks all for your time. Really, really nice to see you all. And let's say goodbye until the next in-person tasting.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, Justin.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.